Dean Rusk disagrees with you, and he was the Secretary of State at the time, but that's fine.
The communist nations have exploited the turmoil of a time of transition in an effort to extend communist control into other areas of the world.
Thoughts on Dean Rusk and America's involvement in Vietnam? I know next to nothing about that.
Exactly. This alert informs you of an urgent issue we discovered during an ongoing audit and the actions ICE has taken to address the issues. Specifically, we found ICE cannot always monitor the location and status of unaccompanied migrant children who are released from DHS and HHS custody. U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, could not monitor the location and status of all unaccompanied migrant children, UCS, or initiate removal proceedings as needed. During our ongoing audit to assess ICE's ability to monitor the location and status of UCs who were released or transferred from the custody of the Department of Homeland Security and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, we learned ICE transferred more than 448,000 UCs to HHS from fiscal years 2019 to 2023. However, ICE was not able to account for the location of all UCs who were released by HHS and did not appear as scheduled in immigration court. ICE reported more than 32,000 UCs failed to appear for their immigration court hearings from FYS 2019 to 2023. Additionally, even though HHS is responsible for the care and custody of UCS, ICE did not always inform HHS's Office of Refugee Resettlement, or when UCS failed to appear in immigration court after release from HHS's custody. ICE enforcement and removal operations ERO officers at only one of the 8 field offices we visited stated they attempted to locate the UCs. ICE also did not serve a notice to appear NTA on all UCSF released from HHS custody who warranted placement in removal proceedings under 8 U.S. Code Section 1229A. As of May 2024, ICE had not served NTAs on more than 291,000 UCs who therefore do not yet have an immigration court date. These issues occurred in part because ICE does not have an automated process for sharing information internally between the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor, OPLA, and ARO, and externally with stakeholders, such as HHS and the Department of Justice, DOJ, regarding UCS who do not appear in immigration court. Additionally, ICE ARO has not developed a formal policy or process to follow up on UCS who did not appear in court, has limited oversight for monitoring UCS, and faced resource limitations. ICE must take immediate action to ensure the safety of UCS residing in the United States. Based on our audit work and according to ICE officials, UCS who do not appear for court are considered at higher risk for trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor. Although we identified more than 32,000 UCs who did not appear for their immigration court dates, that number may have been much larger had ICE issued NTAs to the more than 291,000 UCs who were not placed into removal proceedings. By not issuing NTAs to all UCS, ICE limits its chances of having contact with UCS when they are released from HHS's custody, which reduces opportunities to verify their safety. Without an ability to monitor the location and status of UCS, ICE has no assurance. UCs are safe from trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor. Background. ICE enforces U.S. immigration laws to preserve national security and public safety. Within ICE, ARO protects the homeland by arresting and removing individuals who undermine the safety of our communities and the integrity of our immigration laws. OPLA represents DHS in immigration proceedings involving non-citizens, including UCS. The Homeland Security Act of 2021 defines UCS as minors who have no lawful immigration status in the United States, have not attained 18 years of age, and have no parent or legal guardian in the country available to provide care and physical custody. Once migrants, including UCS, are released from DHS custody, ICE ARO is responsible for managing and monitoring their immigration cases and initiating removal proceedings where appropriate. After DHS apprehends UCS, they are generally transferred by ICE to HHS-OR. Pursuant to the Homeland Security Act of 2002, 2OR is responsible for the care and custody of UCS awaiting immigration proceedings. This includes placing UCs in shelters and with qualified sponsors. OR usually retains custody until UCs are released to the care of a sponsor, transferred to foster care, or turn 18 years old. According to ICE data, ICE transferred 448,820 UCs into the care and custody of HHS ORR from FY 2019 through FY 2023. Table 1 shows the number of UCS ICE transferred to OR by FY. Although ORR is responsible for the care and custody of UCS, ICE retains responsibility for managing their immigration cases. ARO officers and field office juvenile coordinators are responsible for managing UC dockets or cases in their local area of responsibility, including ensuring UCs are properly served NTAs for immigration court. According to ARO's Field Office Juvenile Coordinator Handbook, for proper case management includes monitoring the status of UCs in immigration proceedings and documenting case updates in ICE systems. ARO is also responsible for removing UCs who have final orders of removal from DOJ or who have been granted voluntary departure. ICE cannot monitor location and status of all unaccompanied migrant children released from HHS's custody. In 2008, Congress mandated certain federal agencies, including DHS, HHS, and DOJ, establish policies and programs to ensure UCs are protected from traffickers and other persons who seek to victimize UCs in criminal, harmful, or exploitative activity. 5. In December 2023, OPLA implemented new guidance statistics to promote consistency in handling UCEs in immigration proceedings. Per the new guidance, if a UC fails to appear in court, OPLA must recheck the UC's address information. 7 in coordination with AERO. OPLA officials further explained attempts to identify UC's current location should include external coordination with HHS and updating its case management system. Additionally, ERO officers should disclose information on UCS who failed to appear in court to HHS officials via email. Despite its responsibilities for overseeing UCS through the immigration process, we found ICE cannot always monitor the location and status of UCS once they were released from DHS and HHS custody, even though OPLA issued new guidance to verify the location of UCs who failed to appear for their court hearings and improve. Coordination with HHS, we found ICE often neither followed this guidance nor issued corresponding guidance for its officers in the field. We conducted site visits at 4 ICE locations across the country after the OPLA guidance was issued, but observed no change in local procedures based on the guidance. We met with AERO personnel at 10 field offices, including some virtually. Officers at only 1 location stated they attempted to locate UCS who did not appear in immigration court. ICE did not always alert HHS when UCS did not appear for immigration hearings. According to an ICE official, ICE is not required to share this information with HHS. HHS headquarters staff noted they were not made aware when UCS failed to appear in court, but that having the information would be helpful. Although HHS has an electronic message inbox for ERO offices to inform HHS when UCS do not appear, an ERO headquarters official we interviewed was unaware if local ERO offices were using the inbox or how often ERO field staff sent information on court absences to the inbox. An HHS official we interviewed said, despite the new process for increased coordination between ICE and HHS, ICE did not coordinate when UCS in the local area did not appear for court hearings. HHS officials stated they would like to collaborate more with DHS locally to help UCs. Finally, ICE has not served all UCs with NTAs. The William Wilberforce trafficking victim
requirements for UCS. DHS seeks to remove to be placed in removal proceedings under Section 240 of the Immigration and Nationality Act.
8 US Code Section 1229A. 10 serving UCs with NTAs. More than 90,000 of these UCs without that are properly filed with DOJ initiates this process. NTAs crossed the border in 2021, and as of May 2024, ICE had not served an NTA or still do not have a date to appear and scheduled a court date for more than 291,000 UCs in court. Each ICE location we visited, ERO could not serve NTAs on all UCS. At one location we visited, 34,823, 84% of 41,638 UCs in the local area had not been served NTAs to initiate immigration proceedings. Factors contributing to ICE's inability to monitor unaccompanied migrant children. ICE does not have an automated process for sharing information internally between OPLA and AERO and externally with stakeholders, such as HHS and DOJ, regarding UCs who do not appear in immigration court. Further, ICE-ERO has limited oversight for monitoring UCs and has not developed a formal policy or process to follow up on UCs who did not appear in court. As we, www.oig.dhs.gov.org. Noted in a previous audit report, 11 ICE still lacks adequate staffing, which can limit officers' time and ability to check the location or immigration case status of migrants. Resource constraints also impact AERO's ability to issue NTAs to all UCs after their release from HHS's custody. ICE cannot accurately or effectively share court information on unaccompanied migrant children released from DHS and HHS custody. ICE did not have an accurate, effective, or automated process for sharing information internally between OPLA and AERO and externally with stakeholders such as HHS and DOJ for UCs who fail to appear for immigration hearings. When a UC fails to appear, OPLA is responsible for manually updating its case management system, the Principal Legal Advisors Network, Planet, to indicate the UC's absence. However, ICE data did not include all UCS failing to appear in court. We conducted data analysis and determined OPLA data only included 28,000 UCs who did not appear for their court date. ERO officials reported a difference of more than 4,000 UCs who did not appear in court based on DOJ data. 12. Although OPLA data is what ERO officers in the field relied on to determine court appearances, OPLA officials acknowledge the data is unreliable. Neither ERO's Enforced Alien Removal Module, ERM, nor OPLA's Planet automatically notifies ERO or when UCS do not appear in court. Instead, ICE relies on manual, multi-step processes to share information on UCS who do not appear in court. As part of the process, ERO officers search for each UC in Planet, as time allows, to determine whether the UC appeared and then enter the UC status into ERM. Due to lack of automated information sharing processes, ICE field offices develop manual techniques to share information about UCS who did not appear in court. At one field office, an OPLA attorney created a local workaround with a spreadsheet to monitor the status of UCS and shared this information via email with local ERO officers. ICE officials in the field and at headquarters noted automatic sharing of this information between ERM and Planet would help reduce reliance on manual workarounds such as spreadsheets and emails. ICE and OR also rely on email to share information about UCS who do not appear for their hearings, if the information is shared at all. ERO periodically analyzes UCS cases in a DOJ system. According to an ICE official, ICE does not have an automated process for receiving information from DOJ to determine UCS who failed to appear for immigration hearings. ICE had limited oversight and guidance for unaccompanied migrant children who failed to appear in court. ICE-ERO has limited oversight of UCS and did not have a policy or process to address UCs who failed to show up for their immigration court hearings. Unlike adult migrants, UCs are not required to check in with ARO at any point between their apprehension and court appearance. In some cases, HHS personnel 14 and ARO officers 15 said they never see the UCs before or after HHS releases the UCS to sponsors. OPLA staff may be the only ICE officials UCs ever see in person, and this touchpoint only occurs if the UCs are served NTAs and appear for their hearings. OPLA created Guidance S16 for handling immigration proceedings involving UCS, including procedures when UCS do not appear in court. Although the OPLA guidance references ERO 17, ERO has not formalized the process with steps to take after UCS fail to appear, such as checking to see if the UC has a new address or notifying HHS. OPLA officials explained DOJ, HHS, and DHS. OPLA and ERO agreed to coordinate when a UC fails to appear for court. However, this agreement and related process has not been documented in a formal policy or guidance. Without a formal policy, ARO field offices did not have a standard process to follow up on UCS who did not appear for court. According to an ERO official, field offices may be creating local procedures to handle this process. ICE personnel were also unsure what OPLA's guidance required once a UC did not show up for court. For example, at one location we visited in April 2024, OPLA attorneys said there was limited guidance on responsibilities based on OPLA's December 2023 guidance. According to OPLA officials, ICE ERO has no authority over UCS beyond managing their immigration cases. Therefore, even if ICE were to identify UCs in unsafe conditions, the agency has limited authority to respond. ICE personnel at 2 field offices affirmed this and explained they had identified UCS in unsafe conditions but were unable to intervene. One ICE officer expressed concern with not being able to take action in a case involving a UC whose sponsor claimed the UC was in an inappropriate relationship with her husband. Conclusion. Based on our audit work and according to ICE officials, UCS who did not appear in immigration court are considered more at risk for trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor. Immigration court hearings are often ICE's only opportunity to observe and screen UCs for trafficking indicators or other safety concerns. By not issuing NTAs to all UCs, ICE limits its chances of having contact with UCS when they are released from HHS's custody, which reduces opportunities to verify their safety. Similarly, when ICE does not share information with HHS regarding UCS who did not appear for hearings, HHS personnel are unable to determine if UCS need wellness checks or post-release services for individuals at an increased risk of being trafficked. Without an ability to monitor the location and status of UCS, ICE has no assurance. UCs are safe from trafficking, exploitation, or forced labor. Recommendations. Recommendation 1. We recommend the Deputy Director and Senior Official performing the duties of the Director for ICE evaluate the use of manual processes for information sharing within ICE and with other stakeholders, such as the Department of Justice, identify funding, then develop and implement an automated system to document court appearances and maintain address information of unaccompanied migrant children. Recommendation 2. We recommend the Deputy Director and Senior Official performing the duties of the Director for ICE develop and implement a formal process to identify unaccompanied migrant children who fail to appear for immigration hearings and share this information internally within ICE and externally with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Management comments and OIG analysis. ICE concurred with our recommendations. Appendix B contains a copy of ICE's response in its entirety. We did not receive any technical comments from ICE requiring revisions to the report. We consider Recommendation 1 open and unresolved, and Recommendation 2 open and resolved. A summary of ICE's response to the recommendations and our analysis follows. ICE response to Recommendation 1 concur. ICE ERO will evaluate options to automate internal data sharing between ICE OPLA, ERO systems, and other stakeholders such as the Department of Justice. Once identified, options will be briefed to ICE leadership to decide whether to pursue implementing an automated system given competing mission priorities and demands, as well as the availability of resources and funding. Estimated completion date ECD, December 31st, 2024. OIG analysis, ICE's corrective action plan to evaluate options to automate internal data sharing between ICE OPLA, ERO systems, and other stakeholders meets the intent of the recommendation. However, we consider this recommendation open and unresolved until ICE confirms when it will implement the automated process for sharing information to address the challenges laid out in this alert. Implementation of an automated system to share data with ICE stakeholders is essential to share up-to-date and accurate court appearance information. ICE response to Recommendation 2 concur. ICE, ERO, and OPLA created a new formal process to identify UCS who did not appear for immigration hearings, which will include notifying OR. ICE, ERO will disseminate a broadcast message in August 2024 requiring notification to OR when a UC fails to appear at a scheduled hearing. OR has established a public-facing email inbox for ICE to communicate with OR about UCS failures to appear. ECD, December 31st, 2024. OIG analysis, ICE provided a corrective action plan and an ECD that satisfied the intent of the recommendation. We consider this recommendation resolved and open until we receive documentation demonstrating the deployment and use of the new formal process to identify UCS who did not appear for immigration hearings. Appendix A, Objective, Scope, and Methodology. The Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General was established by the Homeland Security Act of 2002 Pub. L. number 107-296 by amendment to the Inspector General Act of 1978. We issued this management alert as part of an ongoing audit of ICE's ability to monitor UCs who were released from DHS and HHS custody between FYS 2019 and 2023. The objective of our ongoing audit is to determine ICE's ability to monitor the location and status of UCS once released or transferred from DHS and HHS's custody. As part of our audit between October 2023 and May 2024, we interviewed more than 100 officials from ICE Aero, OPLA, Homeland Security Investigations, and the Center for Countering Human Trafficking, as well as external stakeholders from DOJ and HHS. The interviews included meetings with ICE field offices located in Miami, Los Angeles, St. Paul, Minnesota, Philadelphia, San Diego, Baltimore, Houston, Dallas, New York, and Chicago. Reviewed relevant laws, reports, and policies such as the Homeland Security Act of 2002, Immigration and Nationality Act, Appropriations Acts, prior DHS and HHS OIG reports, and internal ICE policies and handbooks. Additionally, we reviewed and analyzed multiple memorandums of agreement between DHS and HHS regarding UCS, reviewed and analyzed ICE data to determine the number of UCS ICE released to OR from FY 2019 through FY 2023, UCS not served NTAs to date, and UCS who did not appear in court. Austin, Texas, the American left so hates this summer's hit Sound of Freedom movie that their media have undertaken a campaign to discredit it. These generally assert that the film about a former ICE Homeland Security Investigations agent's true-life crusade against cross-border child sex trafficking is largely untrue, exaggerates the problem, or fig leafs QAnon conspiracy theories. Rolling Stone magazine's treatment of the film, for instance, described it as a QAnon-tinged thriller about child trafficking designed to appeal to conspiracy-addled boomers. Zesty strains of scaremongering lurk in the shadows around a film outwardly non-insane enough to lure in the persuadable, the liberal British newspaper The Guardian wrote. Reflecting one of the more typical narratives, the Washington Post's reviewer introduced data showing that older children are more trafficked than the really young ones depicted in the movie, so therefore the movie is too discreditable for viewing. But perhaps this issue's many partisan skeptics would find President Joe Biden's Department of Justice more believable. Since the film's release, federal prosecutors under Biden's Attorney General Merrick Garland have written horrifying child sex trafficking tales into their prosecution of very recent court cases, which have received little to no media coverage or skepticism challenging their credibility. The details of these prosecutions are plenty horrifying enough to qualify for any Hollywood movie around Halloween time. So would the FBI's just concluded July Operation Cross Country with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which rescued 200 sex trafficking victims, 59 of whom were minors, in just 2 weeks of trying. Sex traffickers exploit and endanger some of the most vulnerable members of our society and cause their victims unimaginable harm. Attorney General Garland said in a prepared statement announcing the rescues of sex-trafficked children last month. Human traffickers prey on the most vulnerable members of our society, and their crimes scar victims, many of them children, for life, FBI Director Christopher Wray said in a press release. Neither mentioned the obvious connection between this evil and their president's open border and asylum policies, which, without doubt, make it far easier for sex traffickers like Mission, Texas. Prostitution Madame Rita Martinez and her son, Genaro Fuentes, both of whom have just pleaded guilty to sex trafficking charges filed last year, to smuggle underage girls over the border and promptly force them into sexual slavery. This Martinez-Fuentes case, and another recent one involving Cuban men who forced women they smuggled to prostitute themselves in Houston strip clubs, show the inextricable bond between this odious form of human trafficking and lax border control and asylum policies. The lesson is that when border security is tight and fewer illegal immigrants are therefore crossing, less sex trafficking evil can be imported. Conversely, when border security and asylum policies are loose, more women and children will be trafficked, as has been the case under President Biden for nearly 30 months straight. Bordello for child sexual bondage in Mission, Texas, from their well-known Rita's Sports Bar in the Texas border town of Mission. Martinez and Genaro had cartel coyotes smuggle young girls and women over the Mexican border for 20 years, and then, through violence and threats, press them into prostitution to pay off a smuggling debt that somehow never went away, according to their February 2022 indictment. Starting in 1996 and continuing until her 2022 arrest, Martinez would recruit poor women and girls as young as 16 from the Mexican states of Durango and Coahuila with promises of good pay to work in her Mission restaurant or to clean houses, according to the indictment. Martinez would arrange for and pay the coyotes to smuggle them over the Texas border, but the girls discovered a horrifying bait and switch within days of arriving at Rita's Sports Bar ready to clean. She let the girls know Rita's Sports Bar was really more like a bordello, that they owed her a smuggling debt, and they were not going to pay it off sweeping floors or selling cheap beer. They had to have sex with the customers on demand, dates that Martinez or her son would arrange at nearby motels, but they couldn't just leave. Martinez used a variety of coercive means to keep the women and girls under her control and to ensure that they would continue to engage in commercial sex with clients, the indictment reads. She saddled the victims with impossibly high debts, threatened to report them to immigration or the police, and warned them about the harm that might come to their families in Mexico. She insulted and humiliated the women and girls, it went on. She physically assaulted them, including slapping, hitting, and dragging them by their hair if they disobeyed her. Women who showed up with children were pressured to hand them over to Martinez's associates or family members, either in the United States or Mexico, to babysit, for which Martinez further charged the mothers and worse. She'd tell the moms they had to work more in order to see the child. Martinez took away one child and never again let the mother visit. Martinez's son, Fuentes, must have seemed to these victims an even worse monster. Encouraging his mother to beat the indentured girls and forcing them to buy condoms from him was the least of it. Fuentes would sexually assault women and girls who were newly arrived at his mother's home, telling them that he had a right to try them, the indictment said. The roster of victims had to have been much longer than the 14 listed in the government's court filings. The profit was also notable. A plea agreement ordering restitution shows that Martinez will have to pay one victim $185,832, another $96,078, another $96,000. Beyond the fact that these victims were always smuggled over the border, what is perhaps most notable is how many years this criminal operation went on, undiscovered and uninterrupted, in a small, close-knit border town like Mission. Certainly no former ICE agent or private rescuer like Tim Ballard was around to investigate for more than 2 decades that this went on, to blow the whistle or to rescue these girls. Sex trafficking in Houston strip clubs revealed. If the events portrayed in Sound of Freedom are not to be believed because its lead actor is weird or its backers too right-wing and Christian, the events described by the Biden Department of Justice in yet another very recent case should do just as well to connect this scourge to open borders policies. Here is another where border and asylum policies figured prominently. On July 13, a federal judge in Texas sentenced 3 Cuban nationals for smuggling at least 20 Cuban girls and women over the southern border, and then forcing them into prostitution to pay off their forever debts in Houston strip clubs. And not by dancing for customers. Raciel Gutierrez Moreno, 38, Henry Jimenez Milanes, 39, and Rafael Mendoza Labrada, 29, ran the scheme from Houston starting in at least 2017. Prior to crossing the southern border themselves in 2015, Milanes and Moreno had worked as pimps in Cuba before making their way to the American border and claiming asylum, each with an underage girl they'd forced into prostitution back in Cuba. Both men met up in Houston and put the girls to work at prostitution in at least 3 Houston area strip clubs, taking all their earnings to ostensibly pay off their smuggling debt. The men frequently beat these girls or threatened to. Prior to gaining work authorization, many illegal immigrant women find that they can work in strip clubs if they pay the managers to look the other way. That's how the scheme was able to proceed. Once Moreno and Milanes gained their own unspecified immigration status in the United States, they began expanding their operations by smuggling Cuban women in over the southern border. One or both of the Cuban men would recruit women while on vacation trips to Cuba, according to a complaint by the Diplomatic Security Services agent who investigated. They tell their female prospects that for $7,000 or $8,000, they could arrange smuggling from Cuba through Ecuador and eventually to the port of entry at Laredo, Texas, where they could claim asylum. As a bonus, the men would get the girls jobs as fully clothed salsa dancers in Houston where they could make good money. "I dedicate myself to taking women to the United States," Moreno told one victim in Cuba, adding that he also would provide clothing, a job, and a place to live. Often the men met the women in Mexico and traveled with them to the Laredo port of entry, with coached instructions on what to say for their respective asylum claims. They'd meet the women upon their release from ICE custody under lax asylum practices a few days later. But once released, the women learned that the $7,000 they thought they paid was now $30,000. They also learned the men considered this a debt owed, and that they would not be free until they'd paid in full. Many of the women were held in Houston area apartments with one or more of the men, who kept them under constant supervision as they were sold for sex at strip clubs. During the car ride to Houston, Moreno told one victim identified as FCR. She would have to dance and prostitute herself at Playmates Cabaret, the complaint said. Before long, Moreno was raping the woman in the apartment. Moreno routinely threatened to cause physical harm to FCR and or her family in Cuba if she ever crossed him, the complaint said, adding that he threatened to shoot her with a pistol he possessed. The men charged customers at the strip clubs $300 for 30 minutes of sex with their women, or $600 for an hour. FCR had to work 7 days a week and handed Moreno $1,400 a week. The men beat these women regularly, or threatened to, and would not set them free. Milanes beat victim 5 so badly that she had bruises and could not work for some days, an agent complaint described. Over the 4 months she was held before a former boyfriend helped her flee to Florida, the victim handed over $18,000. She was allowed out of the apartment once a month socially during that time. She had to use her $445 a month in food stamps to feed the men and also to pay the electric bill, cook, and clean. But Moreno chased the victim down in Miami and called her family in Cuba, demanding that she pay the final $12,000, or else. He explained that bringing Cuban women to the United States was his only business, the complaint recounted. He warned that he could not allow victim 1 to leave Houston without paying her debt, because the other women working for him would know. Liberal skeptics of the Song of Freedom movie will no doubt continue their assault on its underlying credibility. But will they also cast doubt on the underlying credibility of the stories told in these and quite a few other federal court cases besides, prosecuted under Democratic sale? Even without the movie, maybe these cases can still elevate the human trafficking problem as the border security issue it is to a policy priority that Democrats can accept alongside Republicans.